Hi, I'm Tim Helming from DomainTools, and I'm here with Kyle Wilhoit, our senior security researcher, and today we're going to talk about phishing.
Excellent.
Not the kind with a boat. Well, we can do that too later on.
We could talk about that too.
Today we're going to talk about the kind that Anti-Phishing Working Group says is costing people billions of dollars. The FBI says it's billions of dollars. I think we can agree it's pretty nasty out there. What are you seeing?
Yeah, I agree. And actually, it's my long-term retirement plan is to just go into phishing campaigns and make a good sum of money.
The numbers say it
numbers say it's profitable. The numbers say it works. No, I mean it's pretty obvious, and I think that it's a pretty well understood and established statistic that phishing is one of the most prolific and most common threats that we're witnessing on a daily basis because it's so effective.
I was going to say this has been around forever and ever. It's 2017. Like, why are we talking about phishing? Because it still
works. It's going after the human element, right? I mean, ultimately, you're targeting the human. The technological pieces are not that complex. You're targeting a human element that you really only have to be successful once in an entire organization, right? So
those pesky meat bots.
That's right. That's right.
So it's a species of social engineering attack, obviously, and that's an issue. But are there specific techniques that are kind of gaining traction right now?
Yeah. So I mean, there's a few. One is utilizing typo squatting in conjunction with spearfish campaigns in smaller organizations, and the success behind that is the simple fact that when attackers are going out and they're targeting smaller organizations, it's easier for them to fingerprint who those particular users are. So for instance, the CTO of a smaller organization is easier to spearfish, possibly, than a CTO at a very large bank, for instance. So it's very effective in that fashion that they're going after these smaller organizations and they're using very specific tactics to go after them, mimicking possible outside parties, contracting firms, etc. So there's a lot more targeted nature in phishing attacks, and that's something I've been witnessing a trajectory of happening for the past 6 to 8 months, roughly.
Break down the cyber squatting or typo squatting piece of it. How's that developing or evolving?
Yeah, so a phisher will typically go out and let's say they're wanting to target Sony, for lack of a better example. They can go out and register domain names that would mimic Sony. So that way when they spearfish an email to someone, they can include Sony in the domain name, and it might convince the user to say, oh, that looks legitimate, I'm going to click on it.
But wait, that's a copyright violation. They can't do that, right?
Yeah, they don't care about
the domain registrars stop them from doing that?
To some degree, they attempt to, but they usually look to Sony or the brand themselves to contact registrars and say, hey, I have a violation here, etc., so I want to go out and actually shut this down.
So if I register Sony with a 0 instead of the O, which is probably not available in any of the big TLDs at this point.
Fishers are probably already taken.
Like, that's somewhat obvious to see. Are there things they're doing with squatting that make it harder to spot?
I mean, realistically, that does still work, actually. So swapping out the 0 with an O still works. Because how often are you actually just going out and going to a domain and not necessarily looking at how close that letter is, right? So that still is actually super effective.
Well, one of the other things we've seen is there are a lot of letters that are part of the extended ASCII character set.
Yeah, true.
So there are these so-called small caps, for example, where you could register a small cap O, Sony with a small cap O, and that will look virtually identical.
Absolutely.
Like, it won't be as obvious as a 0.
Good point.
But the other things they do, right, is they make the website on their false domain absolutely mimic the real thing, right? They look totally faithful to the real thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, we just published some research last week, actually, kind of covering around that and just how in the UK and the US both, banks were targeted. Yep. And those particular banks, they had literally cloned the web pages of those banks and changed a few things, typo squatted, and then they were successful.
Go scrape the code off of it, and you've got a perfect lookalike.
Bingo.
Grab the person's credentials when they log in. Yep. Now you've got their bank credentials, and don't they usually dump them back to the real site so they don't realize,
Yeah, exactly. Good phishers will. They'll actually redirect you back to the site, log you in like normal, and all the while they've actually just siphoned off your credentials. Right. So yeah, very effective and, to be quite honest, pretty clever. Yeah,
I think one of the key things for people to keep in mind is like none of us are completely immune to this, right? Like I do, I hope I never fall victim to it, but you don't want to have the attitude that you are unfishable, because that attitude would set you up for
100%. I mean, I've almost become a victim myself.
Yeah.
Because that's how good they're getting now.
They're getting really good.
It can happen to the best of us, even people that practice this stuff daily, like you and I.
So what are some things that organizations and individuals should be doing about this?
Yeah, well, the first is utilize just traditional security technologies. So put in place spam mail filtering, put in firewalls, proxies that can actually block going out to some of these domains, but basic security controls as well as security awareness. That's something that I've noticed a big lack. And still to today, I can't believe we're still having this conversation that security awareness is still something that's lacking.
Because you have some people saying, don't bother training the users, they'll never get it, it's not worth it, it's a waste of time. Is that right?
I mean, that's right. And to some degree, I sometimes agree with that because it doesn't seem to be doing much. But unfortunately, this is primarily a human element problem. So it really comes down to training, making sure that people understand they can't click on things like that.
And I think maybe, companies ought to think about, instead of shaming people when they, like, if they fail the fish test or whatever, flip it around, gamify it, say, hey, spot our most dangerous fish, our most crafty one or whatever, and get a $5 coffee card or something like that. Because if your users bring you a real phishing email that they didn't click on, that's an amazing forensic artifact.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, that allows
really good info, right?
That allows me to pivot quite easily to look for additional infrastructure, additional attacker groups, additional campaigns, possibly targeting specific sectors, things like that. So absolutely.
So if you get a gnarly phishing email, like a business email compromised spearfish or something like that, and you don't detonate it, that could actually be your key to getting after the bad guy.
Absolutely.
Well, Kyle Wilhoit, thanks so much for talking to us about phishing,
likewise.
and look forward to the next chat.
Likewise, thanks.